This is the smallest and lightest full-frame anamorphic lens that I have ever seen or used. But does the compact size make it better or worse? Let's take a look. The brand new Sirui Saturn 35mm t2.9 lens has a constant squeeze factor of 1.6 times, and it weighs less than a pound, and it comes in at about $1,200 US at the time of filming. Now, to show you just how small this lens is, here is another 35mm anamorphic lens, and this one is from Great Joy, and you can see just how much taller and wider it is, not to mention heavier. And this is actually one of the smaller anamorphic lenses as well. This is nothing in comparison to the Atlas Orion anamorphic lenses, which I've used before, and their 35mm is just so bulky and heavy. I could never get that to balance on a gimbal. With anamorphic lenses being so expensive for so long, they've basically been out of reach for most filmmakers since their invention. So I've been really excited to see so many different anamorphic lenses coming onto the market over the past few years, and the prices have just been coming down and down. Now let's take a closer look at the lens's build quality and specs, and then we'll get to the real fun stuff, and I'll show you some beautiful anamorphic footage that I was able to capture with this lens, so stick around for that. The front lens barrel is made of carbon fiber, obviously to keep it lighter, and the rest of the lens is made out of a nice solid metal build. There's really no plastic on this, so the whole thing feels really solid. Both the aperture ring and the focus ring turn really smoothly. The focus ring only turns to 120 degrees, so I do think that's a bit of a short focus throw, but being that it's 35mm, most everything is in focus after you get to about 5 or 6 feet away from you, so you don't need a ton of focus adjustability there anyways. The overall length is only 103mm, so you can see it's a lot shorter than something like my iPhone. The compact size makes this lens easy to use on smaller gimbals like the new Ronin RS3 Mini, but even cooler than that, you can put this thing on an FPV drone or use it with the Ronin 4D. So there's just a lot of use cases when you get a lens this small. The lens has a constant squeeze factor of 1.6 times. So no matter where you're focusing, it's always going to maintain that 1.6 times squeeze. Whereas on some other anamorphic lenses, sometimes depending on where you're focusing, that squeeze factor can actually change on you. It does cover full frame like I mentioned earlier. So I'm gonna mount this on my Sony FX3 here. There isn't any really noticeable heavy vignetting around the outside edges that I get from some other anamorphic lenses that claim full frame coverage. Now, when you de-squeeze this, it has an aspect ratio of 2:8:1. So you're getting a really nice, beautiful widescreen effect. And that's when you're using a full frame 16:9 sensor. When you order the lens, you can get it with a neutral streak or a blue streak. Now, for me personally, I love that beautiful blue anamorphic streak. I think it looks gorgeous. It doesn't have to be in just sci-fi films. It can be in commercials and other work. It just has such an iconic look. It has a minimum aperture of t2.9, so it doesn't get super wide open, but honestly, for most of the anamorphic lenses that I've used, this is pretty average. And to get something that opens up even more wide, like t2.0 or wider, it's gonna cost you a lot of money. It has a 10-blade aperture that produces that beautiful oval bokeh. The lens has a minimum focus distance of 3 feet or about 0.9 meters. So you can't get super close up to your subject to get that really nice, creamy, blurred out background. And unfortunately, I've seen that pretty much across all anamorphic lenses. They have a pretty far minimum focus distance. Fortunately, we can get a lot closer to our subject by using diopters. Now, if you're not familiar with diopters, don't worry, it's really simple. It's basically like a magnifying glass for your lens. So this is a filter, it's just another piece of glass, and you actually screw it onto your front lens element. This allows you to focus on your subject a lot closer. Diopters come in all different strengths, and the kit that I bought came with a 1x, 2x, 4x, and 10 times. You don't need to get really confused with this. Basically, each strength that you go higher just allows you to get that much closer to your subject. I bought them off Amazon. I think they were less than 15 bucks, so you don't have to spend a lot of money on these, and they were very effective. For me personally, I found that the 1x and 2x diopters allowed me to get close enough to my subject to get the look that I wanted, and I didn't need anything stronger than that. Something like a 10x diopter is used more for macro photography. Now, something to be aware of when you're using diopters is that they do have some limitations. So yes, you can get a lot closer to your subject, but you can't actually focus to infinity anymore. So you really only want to put diopters on when you're going to be getting your close-up shots and you're not going to be trying to film anything far off in the distance. Now let's take a look at some more footage that I shot with this lens so you can get a better feel for what this lens looks like aesthetically. I really love the look that I've been getting with this lens. It really gives you that cinematic feel right off the bat without needing to do a lot of extra work to get that look. The 35mm focal length is really nice because it just gives you such a wide field of view, and it's a 22mm equivalent on a full frame spherical lens. The oval bokeh is very beautiful and apparent. It's easiest to see when you have backlight shining through foliage or leaves or from small point light sources in the background. And again, I really like to accentuate this by using diopters. It allows you to get that oval bokeh even bigger. I found that the lens flares were actually pretty subtle, which I really liked because with some other lenses, any way you point it, it's pretty much flaring up and you're getting streaks everywhere. And I really don't like that. I prefer to have my lens flares a little bit more subtle and just popping in when I want them. Most of the times when I was getting those large blue streaks was when I was pointing the lens directly at a hard light source like the sun or a car headlight. When it comes to barrel distortion, it's definitely there. You start to see those edges kind of curving in as you get to the outer edges of the image. But honestly, with anamorphic lenses, I really haven't seen any that have super straight edges, so that's just totally expected for me. The color rendering of these lenses looks really natural to me. I didn't notice anything strange or out of the norm. I did do a slight color adjustment. Basically, I just added a little bit more magenta to get rid of that green hue that you pretty much get from any Sony camera. Even the latest ones, it still gets a little of that green tint. I don't know when Sony's gonna stop that from happening. They claim they did it in these latest models, but I still get a little green tint. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. Do you still get green tint with some of your Sony footage? I filmed all the B-roll footage using my Zhiyun Crane 2 gimbal, and it was really light and easy to use for a couple hours because the lens is just so light, and so is my Sony FX3. Now, coming up with a list of cons for this lens has been pretty difficult to do because honestly, overall, it's a great lens in terms of build quality and look. The only thing I would say I already mentioned, and that's that I just wish it had a closer minimum focus distance than 3 feet. But even that honestly is not a big deal because you can solve that really quickly and easily with some diopters, which are really cheap. So if you're interested in picking up the new Sirui Saturn 35mm anamorphic lens, definitely check out the link in the description below. And I want to say a special thanks to the guys over at Sirui for sending this lens out for review. They didn't pay me to say any of this or see this video before posting. All right, guys, if you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe right now, and I'll see you in the next video.